all well know, customer experience has been something that has been around since customers, and there's ebbs and flows around the actual function of customer experience design and execution. So it's enjoying a wave right now. You all actually in your region have been far more customer focused than the US and even in Europe. But it really is one of the only ways you can differentiate, because people can do product development, they can do all sorts of interesting work, but unless your customers are satisfied at the end of the day, they don't come back. So some of the benefits of doing customer experience work, obviously, is to make the business more effective. No one does customer experience work for their health. They want to improve acquisition, retention, and growth. They want to reduce engagement friction. They want to improve scores, because those are the things people are usually paid upon. They want to increase business efficiency. So reduce things like churn, have more referrals, and then improve overall ROI. So really understanding what is most important to your customer not only satisfies them when they interact with you, but it keeps you from having unproductive communications, too many communications, irrelevant communications, and it looks at what drives loyalty and repurchase. It also can help you build your brand health and foster brand trust. So what is customer experience? It's defined as the aggregate of a person's perceptions, feelings, memories, and associations around their engagement with the overall brand. So that's a big swath of information. It's very much brand associated with, as well as interaction associated with. Now, it's kind of interesting. Customer experience is owned by the customer, not by the brand. So there is the customer's experience, and then it's how you serve the customer with that experience, right? So there's two views of that. What we, as an employee of a company, wants the customer to feel, think, and do, and what the customer is coming into and what they think and feel as they're going through. There's a lot of discussion, and this is usually a big arm wrestling thing in companies, is CX and UX, right? So customer experience thinks that they own everything. User experience knows they know everything. And sometimes there's some jockeying up and back. And the reality is that the customer's experience as a whole, it's influenced by the quality and the experience at each touch point, which is user experience and design. But customer experience is especially interested in the entire journey from start until end, not either a product or a channel, particularly in design. Does that mean executives don't really understand their brand's experience? 49% of executives would think that customers will switch brands due to a poor experience, but 89% of customers have already switched. And 44% of executives think customers are really willing to pay for a great CX, while 86% of customers say they're already doing so. So executives are a little bit behind the curve here in understanding the value and the requirement of customer experience. 27% of lost customers are lost forever. That means when they churn, they never come back. And it's estimated that if you looked at that 20% of lost customers, 27% of those who never come back, that could be 400 million for a $2 billion firm. So we're not talking about small change. I'm not going to read this to you. We can look at it, but a bad experience obviously is really, really costly. And the impact of a good experience is really good, right? So likelihood to switch is much lower. Willingness to be able to look at other products and services from the company to drive growth is much higher, and recommendations are much higher. In addition, leaders outperform the market 3-to-1. So we're getting a lot more data than we had over the last few years. 25 years ago, there was nothing. But in the last few years, people are starting to measure shareholder value and actual revenue value. And companies who do CX and even further do journey mapping have a far better average sales cycle, cross-sell, upsell, better mentions in social media, higher revenue from customer referrals, and return on marketing investment. So how do companies do CX? First of all, obviously, they focus on the customer. That is appallingly hard. You don't know in the last 10 years how many times I've had to hand out caps to people, one with customer, one with employee, and how hard it is for employees to put themselves in their customer's shoes. Now, some of them, like Pizza Hut and Nike, actually put their people through a customer experience program on onboarding. Highly, highly effective, because they actually then understand what's important to the customer before they even come on board and try to do their job. It's really important to hire employees based on their ability to relate to others. I have another whole section on skills and behaviors. You can teach skills, but you can't teach the ability to relate, empathy, and the ability to please a customer because you actually have a passion for it or care. I always find it's kind of interesting because there's a lot of outsourcing to the Philippines and other places. And one of the things that we found over the last 25 years is that the cost to outsource is getting less and less as we go through, and networks are global and things like that. But the cost of training and enabling empathy and enabling empowerment is so much higher that sometimes it doesn't make sense to outsource. Training is really, really important. Continuous training on not only the technology, but on the culture, personalization, and tools like AI to create more relevant communications at the right time, at the right place, testing and learning for continuous improvement, mapping and measuring to see where improvements can and should be made, and then having diverse teams and design thinking to really understand customer issues and create better solutions. I'm going to take a breath. Is there a question here?
Yeah, no, there's just a comment.
There are a lot of companies. Yeah, I find that, back in the day when I used to engineer call centers and do a lot of work in the area, we used to do a tiered call center environment. So your best customers were onshore and your least customers were offshore. But again, the management and training of that has now become as expensive as anything else. And because networking costs are so much cheaper now globally, it doesn't really matter where you are. The cost of service and technology is very low. It's the cost of people that's much higher.
Yeah, I wanted just to pause there for a moment and going back to your slide and just ask the forum around the, understanding around the CX design and the UX design and those teams being confused in what they're doing in organizations. Is anyone having that challenge at all?
My role's set up to be that challenge because here I am with the owner of 2 websites, yet I am CX. So that's all the stuff that we're looking to realign to. I should not be the owner of a product or a channel because my role is to really understand customer and their experience and their journey throughout each of the steps or the use of the product, and that's where it doesn't work properly.
Yep, I've got a couple of good examples for you a little later on.
Okay.
Yeah, journey mapping, or if you think of what a customer journey is, right? It's a framework that tells the story.
Yeah.
All you're doing is taking your data, but in that data could be surveys, it could be ethnographic, it could be Google Analytics, it could be pointillist, it doesn't matter. All of those things are welcome. If you take those silos of information and you put them in a linear format as compared to what we often do, put it in the silo. Oh, my email marketing is working really well. I have a low sub rate, right? Or my IVR is working really well. It's very efficient. The problem is the customer's journey is linear and they use more than one channel.
Yes.
They don't use every channel, but they tend to use 2 and possibly 3 channels, right? You know, everybody is now sitting in front of their computer. They probably have their mobile by their right or left hand. And at the same time, they're doing something else, even physically taking notes. So we are omni-channel creatures, and we tend to pick up the thing that's closest to us at any point in time and expect that the companies we interact with, I'm just frustrated as heck right now because I can't find an order number to return something. And it's really difficult on the computer to do that. Their chat isn't working, probably because they're understaffed. And so I'm now going to have to call them. And so, you know, I expect all hands to, right? So the utility company is totally irrelevant to me in my whole life, unless I'm going to have an interaction with them that has them turning off my power in the middle of a demo. Oops, right? So if you look at what the customer's whole life is, it's about them. It's not about the brand, even though many brands think that they bring good things to life and all that other stuff. They are trying to be relevant. The reality is that they're relevant far further down the food chain. So life cycles can be years long. It's essentially a brand-centric view of the relevance of that brand over time. Whether you're a bank, an insurance company, a utility, a retail company, right? Your life cycles can oftentimes be years and years long, where you either have multiple transactions or very few. You know, healthcare companies are a very interesting segment because their best customers never interact with them, but it hardly gives them time or the ability to show how important they are in case they are needed, right? So it's a very interesting thing for each brand to understand their life cycle in as meaningful a way as possible. And then they have experiences and journeys. So these are the shorter term sequence of moments. They're very useful for process design, right? Because you can kind of clip them and look at them with the service blueprint and UX. And they have a very much more transactional view and digital enablers as you go through a customer journey. So if you call it a touch point, or we have a software tool called SuiteCX that we call them, because we have to be different, interaction points or eye points, right? All of these just are enablers as you go through the customer journey. And as you go through or to a touch point, you're either going to move forward, backwards, or stay the same. And our objective is to understand how that happens and why it happens, right? Remember, we're actually thinking and feeling as we go through. So a customer journey map isn't also just about the moments of truth, the moments of surprise and delight. It's about moments that get the customer where they need to go, so that it can be really great or really terrible, right? And we tend to remember the ones that aren't so good. What makes a good journey map, right? Start with the end in mind. What are you trying to achieve, right? Visualize the customer's interactions with emotional and rational elements. Make sure that you've got the customer's perspective as well as the company's. They evolve constantly, changing the organization they support. They reflect the voice of the customer. And we often also ask the voice of the customer through the employee. Now, what I mean about that is if you ask the customer certain questions and you ask your frontline employees the same questions, it's amazing the amount of information you get from your frontline employees. Hardly anybody listens to them, and they know where all the bones are buried. They know the issues. So being able to look at the customer and the employee who's servicing them and understand their alignment and their ability to add information is really important. And finally, it's not all art. It's not all science. It takes somebody who has a little bit of skill in both, and it has a little spark of passion or magic in there to do a really good map. Anybody have anything else that they think would be a good journey map?
Not so much that. I was just going to ask Val, is this cycle here based on your years of experience? Where have you seen people take shortcuts, and it's proved to be a disaster?
Yeah, well, when they're doing mapping, when they're actually studying something, it's kind of interesting if they take a shortcut and say, well, hey, we don't have to worry about inspiration or lead generation, as it were, or we don't have to worry about the purchasing or the deployment of something. And that happens a lot. Oh, they bought it. We don't have to pay attention. What happens is if you don't study all of these motions, as it were, invariably there's going to be a gap further down the line that you didn't think of, right? So you don't have to start by boiling the ocean and doing everything, but we find that it's really helpful to at least define your life cycles and then look at them a mile wide and an inch deep, just to see the ones that are the most important to your company. Now, if you're a B2B company, invariably onboarding is one of the most important places to be able to engage and lock in a customer. And it's oftentimes the one that's most rushed through because, oh, it costs a lot of money to onboard somebody. Let's just get them on. They'll figure it out, right? The relationship is really important in companies that have a lot of churn, right? So if you're in telco or you're in banking and it's really easy to change, then having a relationship becomes more and more important to keep someone sticky. So as you go through this, we recommend that you build like a little atlas of all the things that are important. And then you can prioritize based on all the other things that are happening in the company, so you can support those as you go along. So there's lots of different techniques, right? Surveys identify key inflection points, things like satisfaction, pain points, moments of truth. Data and metrics help evaluate tactics, effectiveness, ROI, things like consumer lifetime value. Generally, we like to do a segmentation for value, needs, and behavior before we start doing work mapping, so we know which ones are the most important. And, most companies have that 80-20 rule where the concentration of 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your customers. So making sure you get that right for them is really important. Segments or personas. Now, does everyone know what the difference between a segment and a persona is?
I think we all have a definition, but it'd be good to hear it from you, Val.
Sure. So a segment is statistically derived. You take the data that's transactional, emotional, revenue, tenure, literally anything that has a customer ID associated with it, throw it into a SAS data set and do a K cluster. Right, so that enables you to have these people with very differentiated behaviors, very differentiated needs and descriptions. If you have ever worked with some of the companies like Experian or Axiom, they have their own personas and that are aspirational, and they may describe a group of people, but you can't find them in a database. So personas tend to be descriptions that are higher level, that are easy to understand, like Molly Millennial or Samantha Senior. And a lot of people use an agency and go to great lengths and expense to do these beautiful personas, but then they can't find them in their database and they don't know how valuable they are and they don't know what channel they're using. So we always recommend that you start with a real statistical segmentation and then you derive persona descriptions from it. Make sense?
Yeah, that's
Having
great.
ethnographic research is really important. We have a heavy dependence and need to look at click streams and data flows, and with digital transformation being pushed on a lot of people because it's easy to collect that information, it's really interesting how many people forget that we need to know why something is happening as well as what is happening. So ethnographic research informs what's going on. It informs your offers, your messages. It supports training for empathy and understanding, and it is a critical part of the overall journey.
Now, I've just recently heard about this scenario modeling instead of personas, and I'd like your view on that. Have you worked that way before?
Yeah. I'm again, if you cannot, so think of the concept of macro and micro experience. My macro experience focuses on acquisition, retention, and growth. And micro experience focuses on campaigns, messaging, and scenarios actionable. By doing one of those 6 things, then you're not going to be successful. So scenario planning is interesting, right? But again, if you can't tie it back to an action that creates a reaction in your company, like a purchase or a repurchase, then it's not as successful. So you could combine that, but you need the other as well. One of the things, again, that one of the underlining tips that is just really important for those of us who are doing CX is that we need to tie ourselves to metrics that the executives understand, because things like Net Promoter Score and customer effort and satisfaction have no correlation at all to loyalty or repurchase. None, zip, zero. Much as we would like to have them, they're not. But there's 100% correlation between attrition and dissatisfaction. So that's something that you could go after. But if you're doing a smart job of ingratiating yourself to sales, marketing, and service, looking at acquisition, retention, and growth, where the numbers are already there and you can tag along, is much easier for you to succeed. My tip of the day, that is just critical, because you can't impress people with, numbers that, that was the downfall of marketing in 2008 with all the beautiful spider diagrams and everything. They couldn't prove that they were making the company money. Sales could prove that they were making company money. And when the downturn came, guess who got laid off? So I'm not going to go through this really detailed work plan here, but this is a typical work plan for building a map, right? Obviously, you need to get organized. Having an objective and having an understanding of why you might want to map something is really, really important. Without that, you tend not knowing where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to get somewhere. Gathering your data, right? So you don't have to have all of this data, but it is good to have, as I said, a bit of transactional and clickstream data, as well as ethnographic, firmographic, if you're B2B, or demographic information. Your best source of a lot of that is through voice of the customer, voice of the employee, and doing some CX maturity modeling. You can go agile, you can go deep, right? So there you can run through this and do lots of sprints and do this in a virtual mode. Being agile is a lot more effective than trying to do something really deep, because you lose people. So I tend to do multiple rounds of review where you lay down a map, then you come back and say which are the moments of truth, and then you come back and say which are the pain points, and then you come back and say, tell me stories about this. And that enables people to stay engaged. Ideation. So you can call this design thinking, scenario planning, human-centered design, brainstorming. This is the place where you bring all those techniques to bear to be able to figure out what that future state might be, should you not have constraints, and should you not have cost factors, and if you had a blue ocean strategy, whatever you want to apply here, this is the place to do it. And then once you've done that, you got to prioritize. Invariably, people have 88 things they want to do. It's going to be really exciting. The world's going to be great. And the reality is that companies can usually only focus on with others on what not to do. What is not important to the customer? What is not important to the company? Why are we spending life force doing this? Well, 15 years, some CEOs said we have to do this. No, because what happens is that all these ideas come up and you're already overburdened. And so now you don't have time to do these. You need to understand what you should stop doing as much as what you should start. And then that lends itself to a roadmap. Questions? Am I going too fast? I'm trying to.
No,
to
no,
kind of
that's
run-
I
perfect.
really appreciated your last statement just then.
What not to do? Yeah.
The constant, no, the more about the CEO made a decision 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and too
Yeah.
many people get stuck on we've always done it this way, and it's like, yeah,
Yep.
but is there a better way, or why is it still necessary in today? Is it redundant now?
Yep. Or unimportant. And the interesting thing is you can always use your customer as the foil.
Yep.
Our customer is now Gen Z or what, Molly, millennial or whatever. She or he doesn't need it anymore.
Yeah.
So we're dragging this thing into the future when it's outlived its usefulness. And again, if you blame the customer instead of making the CEO sensitive, it's a much more effective way of doing that. In fact, doing that in everything you do, especially when you're doing workshops and you have, different groups who have different opinions of things, or there's politics, which of course there never is, right? It's always great to use the customer as that North Star and say, well, I'm sorry, but here's the voice of the customer and here's the data, and it's just telling us that this is what they want. And then that enables you not to say, you stupid idiot, the UX is just ugly, or, we don't need a call center. Nobody calls again anymore, even though the data is clear that they do, right? So if you can put the customer at the center of that, it's a lot easier to get through some of the political hedges.
I think also
So-
reminding people that the organization wouldn't exist without the customer.
Yeah. Well, and again, you hear this a lot. People used to complain about the cost of the call center. And this is before we even had, I'm so old, it was before the internet, right? They said, well, we could pull that call center out for you. It'd save you a whole lot of money, but I don't know how long you're going to be in business. And so it's the same thing, is people forget that, it's, and again, you can have your ear to the ground, but I'm sure you all hear, well, this is what we want them to do. We want them to digitally transform. Well, I might not want to digitally transform, right? Or I might want to not digitally transform on a particular part of a relationship. I used to drive by my bank every Friday and drop my checks off. It was less than a mile from my house. It was on the way from someone else. And I got to see Alfred and a couple other people and pick up my cookie and some dog biscuits. And it was my little punctuation at the end of the week to say, oh, gee, I'm making money, right? Now, having said that, I'm now not in the footprint of the bank that I just love. So now I do mobile banking. But they went so far as when I left and they knew I was moving out here and there were no branches, they gave me a dozen stamped envelopes that said, if you ever need to mail anything, just let us know. We'll send you more. It made you feel wanted and good, right? Okay, we have 30 minutes left. I'll go faster. Okay, we're into mapping now. Personality of a company often influences how to communicate these key messages. This is a really interesting thing because there's not one way to do mapping, right? If you are a Six Sigma type company with lots of oversight, governance, and regulation, you're going to be really into grids and swim lanes and asking really clear questions. If you're pharma or CPG or a startup, you tend to be more agency driven. You like storytelling. So there is no one right way to do it. You need both, right? So you need to really understand what you're going to be doing. And I'm going to dance through this so that we can get to our sessions, right? So understanding what your business objective is, as I said, the most important thing around all of this. So in this particular event, we're trying to understand customer churn to figure out why customers are dropping out of a weight loss program. This is a company I did some work with over the years. They were growing at incredible speeds and suddenly they stopped. So they said, what's happening? Our revenue is going down. We don't understand. We looked at their data and found out that their customers were leaving before they lost the weight that they were planning on losing. And so they weren't getting any referrals. There was just a really bad cycle going on. So we asked the customer some things. You know, we did a voice of the customer. We got some good and bad input. We did a very straightforward and simple journey map. Journey maps do not have to be heavily complex. So this is an example of the first visit from a customer coming in for the first time. If you look at the little hands up, things are going well. If you look at the little lightning rods, things are not going so well. There's a few bombs out there, right? So as you're going through, you're looking at what's going on for the first thing. Now, this is another very helpful technique with a map. I call this the I love it, I hate it map, right? Things are going well, I get a great gift. My patient portal is terrible. Oh, the food is pretty good. I love the mindful weight loss seminars. I want to go back and have my counselor. I love the counselor I had last time. Nope, you get whoever's in line, right? So if you go up and down here, you can see really easily the things that need to be improved, and you can see the things that are going well that you need to do more of. Now, in this case, we did a segmentation, which was really interesting, right? The best customer was what we titled the working woman. So she was all of us that are out there juggling kids and running around and traveling, and every 3 or 4 weeks they go on a trip, right? They get to the Marriott, it's 10 o'clock at night, they have a drink, and it's like, oh great, I'm gonna have a Marriott hamburger. And they have a hamburger and another drink, and boom, they're off the diet, right? Because this was a really strict diet. And they'd come back and they'd be like, oh no, I can't go back. I'm too depressed. I've done it wrong, right? And that wasn't something that the clinicians and the business understood. So when we pulled out this segment and looked at the fact that they were dropping out, every single one was dropping out about week 4 or 5. They had no idea why. And it was because, guess what? They're traveling. So the light bulb went on that they needed to give these poor women tips around the fact that if she didn't eat fruit all day, she could have a glass of wine, right? So there's a lot of really interesting things that comes up. We asked questions of what the employees were saying. We got a lot of complaints from the customers saying, well, we don't think the clinicians are listening to them because they're typing away on their computer and they're not looking at us. And we walked into the room and we realized that the chair was sitting next to the clinician, not across from the clinician. So the clinician couldn't swivel their head left and right constantly when they're trying to take notes. So they put the person in front of them and that problem went away. So there's all sorts of user experience things that can come back to you really easily by just doing some observations and things like that. There's a couple of case studies. I'm going to skip through those and I'm going to hang on this one just for a moment, and then we're going to get into actually doing some apps. Is that okay? So this is the one that ties CX and UX beautifully. This particular customer was a check company that did printed checks for the last 50 years. They're the biggest check company in the US. And they were moving to some digital transformation. They wanted to change some things. And they had a new product that allowed people to either write a check or do an ACH. Anything that they needed, they could do it. And it didn't interfere with how they would do their business. So it made it really flexible. And they were really excited about it. So they dove in, and then suddenly they realized that people weren't converting. So these are existing customers with relationships. They were not converting to this new product. They didn't understand why. So we did a quick view of what was going on during the process. They had a little data which said just before they were going to become on board in this particular product, 70% of the people dropped off. And we said, what the heck is happening? So we examined that a little bit, got some voice of the customer. They said, we're worried about security. This is what the heck, we're really secure. We're worried about value proposition. Well, what the heck? This is a great product. And one of the most surprising ones is we keep waiting to hear something from you and we don't. So we pasted the user experience along the bottom here, just like it was going. And what we realized is that they were asking for the bank password and ID before someone actually became a customer and went on board. Well, no one in their right mind is going to give you your bank account number and a password before you actually go through the security review. So the product manager took a look over at the UX guy and said, why did you do this? This is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And the UX guy said, go look at your requirements document. You said at first possible touch, get this information. Isn't it beautiful? The call to action is really clear. So this is a really great way to get your CX and UX people aligned, because this happens on pretty much every single client. Questions? Okay, on to the exercise. Now, some of you have journeys that you wanted to just start sketching out yourself, and that's perfectly fine. For those of you who don't, I've just put this really simple exercise together here. And think about buying sunglasses or regular glasses. It doesn't really matter. So as you're going through, you're going to take a piece of paper, or if you want to do it in PowerPoint or whatever, I don't care, and walk through buying sunglasses, right? When did you feel you had the need? Was it when you were heading on a beach trip and you realized you didn't have them? Or was it something that you do every couple of years, you update them? So where do you go? What do you think about? Is it part of your annual eye visit, right? What were you doing when you first decided you had a need? What did you do next? What did you do next? So just put the touches down on either an up and down, I love it, I hate it, a straight line, whatever moves you to try to tell the story of buying sunglasses, right? What did you feel at the end of the task? Did you have some emotions around it? What were you feeling? What parts of the experience were good? What parts weren't, right? So think about that and draw me an experience map in the next 10 minutes. Oh,
I'll go. Mine's written as well, and my handwriting is awful. But for me, the awareness came from when I was driving with sun glare. And that's why I'm like, okay, I'm getting headaches because I tend to frown a lot when I get the sun glare. So I wanted sunglasses that were I could use whilst driving, but were also fashionable, because then I could use them for when I was heading out to somewhere like the beach or to a barbecue or something like that. So I looked online and I was looking at different products, and I wanted to compare the different types of sunglasses out there that would look nice for me. And then I used that
how
to
could
help.
you tell that they would look nice? Did
Just
they have
the
a
shape.
feature that made it? Yeah, you knew
Just
what
the
shape you liked?
Yeah, shape.
Okay.
Just get an idea of what brands would match the style I was sort of looking for. Because that would help me narrow down, because I don't like being in the store for too long, and typically male, I want to be in and out of a shop within about 5 or 10 minutes. So then I found, so I was narrowed it down, but I wasn't settled on a particular brand. It was a particular style. So I was happy to consider different brands that would suit that style. Then located sunglass shops that were nearby to me, because that the determinant for me again is I don't like to spend ages looking for parking, and I want to be convenient. So that was a factor for me. I don't like going to the biggest shopping centres. If I can find a smaller one, I tend to find it's easier to get to, and I get
The
better
key
customer
criteria.
service. Yeah,
Sure. Any pain points that you noticed that were that you weren't getting from these different vendors?
Just trying to find the pain point would be obviously just the range. Trying to find a brand, and so it ends up always landing on Sunglass Hut in Australia.
Okay. Oh, good. They're a client. I like them.
Yeah. So I went there. I tried on a few different glasses with them. They were really good and helpful. They asked what sort of style I was looking for. They made a few recommendations themselves in other brands that I hadn't seen online, which is really handy. And that's why I like going to the physical stores. And so it was good. And then they made the recommendations after I settled on the glasses about how to do glass care, and they recommended some cleaning solutions and threw in a few little extras here and there. So that was really good, and that made me happy with that. And they told me to come back for any adjustments if I needed to. So that was good. And the use now was, or the use at the time was mostly for driving, but also the other bits that I mentioned before, going out to parties or barbecues and stuff. So
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions, anybody? Okay. I was looking for a Sunglass Hut journey as we're going through this. I have some videos. Okay. Do we have time for one more, and then we'll go into future state?
I think we'll have to go straight into future state, and then maybe we can get Michelle to talk through her future state, and maybe Diana or Anna.
Got it. Okay, so now that you've done a current state, let's try mapping future state, right? This is where you ideate and say, if I had a way to buy sunglasses today, what would it be? How would be the most fabulous way to do it? Or why couldn't I take a picture of myself on my mobile and see what glasses would look like on me, or whatever it is? Design the ideal experience now of getting sunglasses, and think about what's different from the way that you described it.
Well, I guess with the future state, and just thinking about the process that we're going through, which is a brilliant way to be co-designing with the customers and the employees, and that is that you know, you can run a session, and as you said, the agile approach around coming up with the current state, gathering some initial data, then taking it in with customers and going through it, and then maybe coming back and doing a future state with them as well. So I'm just thinking about this exercise, and the approach that we've undertaken is also a good way to do it with customers as well, isn't it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So this is generally both the current and the future state are done with the customer. We tend to try to do a straw man of the current state and then validate it and then go through certain passes. But again, depending on the maturity of the customer and the type of customers, there's all those techniques we talked about that can be utilized to get people juices going and thinking about what they could do differently. And then generally what happens with future states a little bit too future. So then we reel them back with the prioritization of how to get this done and make it more actionable.
Yeah, I can share my future state. Sorry, I got a little guy in the background just having a hard time before dinner time. So future state. So in my experience, I had gotten, my husband and I went to the store, and I had gotten Ray-Bans, and they were cool Ray-Bans. I was feeling really good about them. But they like had those little nose bridges. So when you go to like put them up in your hair, they get tangled in your hair. And I'm like, and so I just would never wear them because that was such an annoyance to me, like to not have anywhere to put them. So future state would be, I would like recommendations based on my head shape, because there was an associate that was trying to help us, and she was like, oh, you have kind of a small head, like, you know, try these on. But it was like kind of her opinion. Like I would like some recommendations, like, based on your head shape, here's what we think would look well. If you, do you want to put them up in your hair? Here's the styles that work for that. So I think the experience of like trying them on in the store was great. I just was like decision paralysis. And then I had a little bit of buyer's remorse when I realized they like weren't that functional for me. So I think that was the main thing that would change, is just more like practically how I want to wear my sunglasses. And then if someone could have guided me to that before I made the purchase.
Yeah, I can share. So basically, just to understand my case is, I'm an international student, really want to go on a study overseas. I found that one of the requirements to be in a university is that I need to sit an English test. And once I do my research and decide what test do I want to do, I go online and start like, you know, following all the steps to have my registration to be able to book a test. So once I go online, they ask a lot of questions, my nationality, what do I want, like the colors, expectation, like things that they want to know. And once I fill in a lot of information, they said, okay, now you need to add a copy of your passport. So at that point of the process, I didn't have my passport. So what do? Just drop my, you know, the process that I'm doing, and, you know, just find a way to get my passport and come back. So once I decided to come back to the website, guess what? I have to start from scratch. So big pain point. So one thing in terms of the improvement is like, if from the beginning they said, look, this step is going to take 10 minutes. Make sure you have this ready with you. Have your passport, has your, you know, the addresses or all the details of the university, things that will prepare you better. And once you have that, you're not going to waste time, and you can make the process simple. So as a result, I decided to go with a different company and sit a different English test.
Okay.
Focus on the adoption journey and getting our users to adopt our platform. So it became a company rock. So there were so many people that were kind of like too many cooks in the kitchen trying to be like, all right, the adoption journey, here's what we need to do. That I look at that map and I'm like, man, that, like, you know, the second step is doing research. And we just had like so many people who had ideas about the adoption journey that like clouded the data that we could have been collecting. So I think that was helpful for me to just see that and see how that was all laid out, because that was a good reminder of where we went off the rails a little bit, which is trying.
Let's say we were doing the journey mapping of a whole process, and it's a big process, like with lots of interactions of, you know, different stakeholders. How do you know where to focus in that big process, like in you know, in terms of improvements, or yeah, you know, to know what is working and what is not working? I mean, basically you need to go step by step, like how in detail you go or how general you do it.
Start. So some of the tips that you'll see here, because we're going to run out of time, right? Being able to look at the steps and then go back, do rounds of review of them and say, which are the top 3 moments of truth. So you may have 5 moments of truth, dive on those and leave the other stuff behind for another time, right? What we normally end up doing is we identify the moments of truth that are really customer focused, the moments of truth that are customer focused that are pain points. The company has moments of truth as well, key decision points. Which ones are pain points? And then the ones you really want to focus on are the common ones. What are pain points that are moments of truth for both the company and the customer? Those are going to get you the most bang for your buck in time. Then the next list that you look at are, well, gee, these are customer pain points that are key moments of truth. Sometimes they'll lead you a new product development. Sometimes you can't do anything about it. You might be able to share with them some information that might help them, that, you know, like for instance, if you're doing Uber Eats, right? That pain point that the Uber driver goes to the restaurant and it's closed, right? It's a bigger pain point for the customer. But you could set up a process there that helps the customer not have that pain point that then is referred to you. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, you know, again, don't try to boil the ocean. Go do some simple, identify some things that are obvious problems. Preferably, the other tip there is start out, if you're not really experienced at doing this, with projects or maps that only have a couple of departments, right? So maybe it's just marketing or success or sales. Don't try to do a complex one where legal and sales and IT and everybody's all involved. because you'll get into that situation that you just described with 50 people. Everybody's got an opinion, and you end up trying to herd them all, and that's difficult until you get a little more experience. Good. So just again, as a close, there's some more slides in here around some tips and techniques. This is a really important one around critical success factors. And then there's a whole section in here around getting buy-in from your executives that you can is self-service. And I also have some resources, right? If you go over to our SuiteCX YouTube channel, so go to YouTube and just search for SuiteCX. There's a ton of interesting thought leadership there. Anita obviously has a lot as well. And then there's a lot of different additional resources as you go along. And, you know, you obviously have Anita as a resource, but if you have questions or whatever, feel free to email me as